democracies are loud, noisy, and a rambunctious system of government, and they have many flaws. But as Winston Churchill put it in 1947, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. In World War II, over 15 million soldiers died and almost 100 million men and women of all nations perished to save democracies in what was fundamentally a struggle against the totalitarian regimes of Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan, and Nazi Germany, who alone killed over 6 million Jews. In President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1941 State of the Union speech, he described it as the fight for the 4 freedoms of mankind.
Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights and keep them.
So why does it not suit Israel to be surrounded by democracies? And in some instances, how has it helped authoritarian governments to retain their power? Please subscribe and like and share the video if you do enjoy the content on this channel. It will help me to bring a variety of new people and topics to you and to discuss the different issues which affect all of us intellectually and emotionally as human beings. To say that Israel doesn't want to have democracies in the Middle East is a controversial claim. But there are rational reasons for Israel to prefer to work with authoritarian leaders, and in many instances it has actively worked on ensuring that democracy does not take off in the Middle East. These include being seen as the exceptional state in the Middle East, security concerns, and ensuring a regional stability in its own favor. By an exceptional state, what I mean is that no other real democracies exist in the region. Israel has a strategic importance in being the only one. Israel presents itself as a haven for democracy in a tough neighborhood of authoritarianism and inherent violence and backwardness. This diplomatic leverage across the Western world is fully used to good advantage by Israel.
And we are defined by a democratic discourse. So in Israel, we see values that we share.
Principles, our ideas, our values are the same values. I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one.
The U.S.-Israel relationship is special and strong because it is rooted in our shared values and our shared interests.
Israel has deep shared values with the United States.
Israel is the only country in that region of the world that shares our values, our democratic values.
Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, once said, "We live in the 20th century, they, the Arabs, in the 15th," and stressed that Israel represents a modern society in the midst of a medieval world. A similar message has been echoed by former Defense Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, who has often referred to the country as a villa in a jungle or an oasis fortress in a desert to describe Israel's relationship with its Arab neighbors. And in his 1993 book, A Place Among Nations, Israel and the World, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu argued that violence is ubiquitous in the political life of all Arab countries. It is the primary method of dealing with opponents, both foreign and domestic, both Arab and non-Arabs. This stereotypical portrayal of Arabs is exactly what was condemned by Edward Said, the famous Palestinian professor at Columbia University, in his 1978 seminal book Orientalism, which is one of the most important books written in the field of post-colonial studies. The message being that Israel shares the same values as the US and European countries and is the only stable country on which, for example, the United States can rely on to achieve its strategic objectives in the neighborhood.
Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
This racism around Arabs has not changed much. Witness how post-October the 7th, when Palestinians were described by the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who said, "We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly."
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
In selling itself as the exceptional country in the region that shares values with the largest superpower in the world, Israel has received close to $300 billion in total economic and military assistance since 1948. The United States sees Israel as its stalwart ally and whom it can rely on to have a foothold in the region. So how do Arabs feel about democracy? Well, you may be surprised, but they seem to like it as much as anyone else across the world. When surveys are done, for example, the 2022 Arab Opinion Index done in 14 Arab countries, including Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, 72% of the public supported a democratic system, as compared to 19% against it. Probably the foremost reason, though, why Israel has no lost love for Arab democracies is due to its pragmatic view on ensuring the stability of the regimes it deals with in its neighborhood. Democracies mean people power, and Israel knows fully well that the Arab populations are vehemently anti-Israel due to the Palestinian issue, and if it has a neighborhood full of these democracies, it will have to make compromises on the question of Palestinian statehood, which it does not want to do. Iran, though it is a non-Arab country, is an interesting example. Iran is not a Western-style democracy, but it is nevertheless far more populist regime than most Arab regimes, and it uses the street feeling on Palestine as a support base for its own continuation. A recent survey of the Arab populations in 16 Arab countries in 2023, post-October the 7th, shows that 92% of Arabs believe that the Palestinian question affects them all. 88% of Arabs don't like the idea of a diplomatic recognition of Israel by their countries, and 66% of the Arab population considers Israel and the United States as the two countries that most threaten their security in the Arab world. Iran comes a very distant third place with 12%. These percentages would most likely translate into electoral wins for popular governments that were anti-Israel. They would have a more pro-Palestinian rhetoric, and this would push regional policies to highlight the Palestinian cause much more stringently than is currently being done. Right now, authoritarian governments in the Middle East have sidelined the Palestinian issue for their own objectives. I've done a separate vlog on explaining why they've done this, which you can see here, and I will also put a link in the description. Despite knowing that the majority of their population does not want Israel to be recognized, we know that the rulers of Saudi Arabia currently are in the midst of discussions to recognize Israel for their own objectives. By comparison, Turkey's elected government has, under popular pressure and huge public protests in favor of the Palestinians, brought back its ambassador from Israel and recently introduced a total trade ban on Israel worth over $9.5 billion. By comparison, the United Arab Emirates has continued with its trade with Israel, which is worth around $2.5 billion, and its ambassador is still there. Arab countries have generally also clamped down on public dissent over what Israel is doing in Gaza and have banned protests and in many cases even criticism on social and electronic media. Israel's support for autocratic regimes in the Middle East is easily explained as a stability through control paradigm that they have. Autocratic regimes, despite their suppression of political freedoms, offer a predictable and stable environment for Israel. So it has historically maintained strong relationships with authoritarian regimes in the region that have been willing to engage in peace treaties or maintain non-hostile relations with the country. For instance, Israel's peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan were brokered with authoritarian leaders, and these relationships have remained stable over decades now. In recent years, the Abrahamic Accords have been signed with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, none of which are democracies. During the Arab Spring Revolution in 2011, Arabs across the region rose like the color revolutions of the Soviet and the Balkan states, asking for democracy, free elections, and removal of authoritarian governments. Protests and uprising, starting from Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, Egypt, across to Bahrain, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, were just some of the states that were affected. Israel watched these events with trepidation, wary of Islamist governments taking power. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the time blasted the Arab uprisings as an Islamic, anti-Western, anti-liberal, anti-Israel and anti-democratic wave. He spent a lot of time explaining this to the Americans, as initially it seemed that they were welcoming these uprisings. Similarly, the defense minister at the time, Ehud Barak, stated those leaderships, as much as they were unaccepted by their peoples, they were very responsible on regional stability. They're much more comfortable to us than the people or the streets in the same countries. Hosni Mubarak, president of Egypt, was one of the well-known names who was toppled by the Arab Spring in February 2011 after holding power for over 30 years. Israel had developed a meaningful relationship after Camp David with the Egyptian deep state and was very worried when the Muslim Brotherhood won the election and Morsi became president of Egypt. In November 2012, Israel attacked the Gaza Strip, which led to the death and wounding of around 330 Palestinians. At the time, President Morsi took a number of stringent actions, including recalling the Egyptian ambassador. Compare this to President Sisi, whose ambassador is still in Israel after the deaths of now 40,000 Palestinians. Now, going back to Morsi, he also expelled the Israeli ambassador from Cairo. He announced the opening of the Rafah crossing for over 24 hours a day, and he sent the Prime Minister, Dr. Hisham Kandil, along with a delegation of senior Egyptian officials for a solidarity visit to the Gaza Strip and held an urgent meeting of the Arab League as well. As a democratically elected president, Morsi had to take into account the popular feeling on the street. The Israeli assault at the time only lasted 1 week. On 3rd of July 2013, President Morsi was toppled in a coup by General Sisi. Brigadier General Aryeh Eldad of the Israeli Defense Forces has claimed that Israel was behind the 2013 military coup that ousted Mohammed Morsi, Egypt's first democratically elected president. Eldad made this claim in an article published in the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv, which has been reported by the Middle East Monitor also. He explains that the manner in which President Morsi dealt with the most recent attack on the Gaza Strip indicated that he was a difficult enemy of Israel. As is the case with such matters, we can never know the truth until decades later on who did what. But given the close cooperation between the Israeli and the Egyptian agencies, General Sisi is said to have cultivated close links with Israel during his time as the head of the Egyptian military intelligence. As Robert Kagan, a staunch supporter of Israel, argued after the 2013 military coup, to Israel, which has never supported democracy anywhere in the Middle East except Israel, the presence of a brutal military dictatorship bent on the extermination of Islamicism is not only tolerable but desirable. A senior member of the Obama White House, referring to General Sisi's coup against a democratically elected Islamist government in 2013, it is reported, has said, "The strongest lobbying I got for going easy on Sisi was from Israel." More recently, after the 2019 uprising against the 30-year rule by President al-Bashir in Sudan, as the country was conducting a transitional move to a new democratic government, General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan seized power in a coup. He has been facing uprisings against his rule, but in the midst of this, Israeli military delegations have been meeting him. What assurances he's receiving, if any at all, is unclear. But what is known is that the normalization talks between Sudan and Israel were led by the military. And that when there was condemnation from across the world about the coup, Israel was notably quiet at the time. Israel has also been cultivating its ties with aspiring autocrats such as the Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar and his son Saddam Haftar, both whom went to Israel, allegedly seeking military aid and diplomatic assistance in return for normalizing relations. Haftar is the head of the Libyan National Army, which fought a civil war against the North African state's internationally recognized government at the time, between 2014 and 2020. Israel's interactions with its autocratic neighbors facilitate covert diplomacy and intelligence sharing. These relationships, often discreet, help maintain regional stability and manage threats. But often what these autocrats perceive as threats are to their own power and their retention of position. Pegasus spyware has been sold to Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, used to crush internal dissent. And in Morocco, activists were targeted with the same technology due to their advocacy for protesters and journalists' rights. One of the major reasons why Israel has no issues with working with many of these authoritarian governments is because they have the same enemy, Iran. Cooperation with Israel has also become central to the Gulf and other states' thinking when it comes to combating Iran. Israel has sold Morocco drones, missiles, and small arms, and the two have also conducted joint military exercises. Former Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz confirmed that a regional air defense alliance is operative, with the explicit goal of countering Iran's missiles and drones. We know when on April the 13th, Iran fired around 300 missiles and drones into Israel, along with the United States and the UK. To the surprise of many, Jordan and Saudi Arabia were reportedly helping Israel to intercept those attacks. Jordan explained this as shooting down missiles that were flying over its own airspace, and Saudis have denied doing any such thing. Interestingly, as mentioned earlier as well, only 12% of the Arab population mentions Iran as a security concern. However, the Iranian threat is perceived much greater by their authoritarian governments and leaders because of their own insecurities of retaining power. At the same time, within the Palestinian territories, to ensure that a democratic government never established itself as a viable entity, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up Hamas as a terror group. The rise of Hamas, with its unpalatable militant profile, has ensured that there would never be a strong united call for a Palestinian state from the powerful Western quarters, especially the United States, the only country that really matters to the Israelis. Most of the time, Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Netanyahu's current finance minister and the West Bank settler Smotrich explained this approach to Israel's Knesset channel in 2015, where he said Hamas is an asset and the Palestinian Authority leader Abu Mazen and the West Bank leader Mahmoud Abbas is a burden. Similarly, Netanyahu at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019 was quoted as saying that those who oppose the Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza because maintaining the separation between Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Hamas has controlled Gaza for over 17 years, and Netanyahu has been Israel's prime minister for more than 13 of the past 15 years. Netanyahu's hawkish defense minister, Lieberman, reported in 2020 that Bibi had dispatched Mossad chief Cohen and the IDF's officer in charge in Gaza, Halevi, to Doha to beg the Qataris to continue to send money to Hamas. This was done after both Egypt and Qatar, who were very angry with Hamas at the time, had planned to cut ties. Coming back full circle to Israel's support for autocracies, this is an important question now, because there is no doubt that had the Middle East had more popularly elected governments, Palestinian genocide would not be happening now. And that is exactly why Israel is not interested in being surrounded by democracies. Thank you so much for joining me again today.